All right, gang. Well, welcome back to the Productivity Hub, where productivity habits unlock breakthroughs. What we're focused on doing here is helping our small and mid-sized businesses and organizations use their core business applications as effectively and productively as possible. So whether that's Microsoft, Google, or some combination of both, we want to help you set the foundation that you need so that you can then grow into the AI landscape that we're emerging into and make use of our guest experts and resources and continue to create a productivity culture around AI features, integrations, and everything that will help you drive your business forward in the months and years to come. I'm really excited to introduce our guest here today. Terence Bennett is a startup leader. He's a cybersecurity expert. He is a veteran and a volunteer. He's currently the general manager at Dream Factory Software, which is an API code automation platform. But previously, he ran operations at Integrate.io and was a member of Google's offensive security red team. Terence served in the U.S. Navy as a naval intelligence officer at NCIS and surface warfare officer during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Terence is a certified information systems security professional through ISC2. He's passionate about giving back to the community through public service. He's on the board of directors for the American Red Cross for the Northern Coastal Region. And he also serves on the board of advisors for Shields and Stripes, a nonprofit organization assisting veterans and first responders with PTSD. So dear to my heart as both a tech advocate as well as a servant and a hero. Terence, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Really good. Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, doing really well and happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So we got together earlier in the week and we're talking about, hey, what would be the most valuable thing for us to get started with our first episode together here, your first time on the pod. And we talked a lot about this idea of empowering the citizen developer. So you want to say a little bit about what that topic means to you, and then we'll get into the specific applications that we're going to be honing in on that we think are really good at achieving that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I spent about 7 years in the Navy, and when you're out at sea, as we joke, alone and unafraid, you rely on yourself, right? And what I learned early on as a junior officer is that sometimes you got to just figure out how to make things work. And I've got some funny stories. Specifically, we pulled into Ghana, and a bunch of our equipment had sustained some pretty bad damage from sea, inundated with salt water. We went out in town and bought a bunch of coax cable from a stereo store and got it all back up and working. And so I sort of take that philosophy, that mindset, and I carry it forward into all the work I do. And so, kind of fast forward a few years, I'm at Google. I started there as an administrative assistant, just kind of entered into kind of entry-level roles. You're trying to figure out the organization and figure out how I fit into it. And I found a tool called Google App Scripts, which is really a powerful framework for how to connect all the different tools within Google Workspace. And kind of borrowing from that same mindset, I started teaching myself JavaScript. JavaScript is sort of like the mother language of Google App Script, more or less the same thing, and started building automations. And so, come to find out years later that there's a name for this. It's called this. It's this like citizen developer movement. It's the idea that the very people who are doing the work, doing the job, can also be empowered to build the tools that make their life easier. And so, whether you're playing with things like Zapier and building custom integrations, or any number of other sort of no-code type tools, or even like low-code tools like a Google Apps Script, you are a citizen developer, whether you realize it or not. And organizations are realizing that by empowering that people who are inclined to that kind of work, that kind of problem solving, they can really turbocharge their organization. So whether you are that program manager, that admin, or whether you are an executive, right, it really implore you to dig into the tools and kind of understand them and either empower yourself or empower your people, because The benefits are, I don't think I need to convince anyone the benefits of being able to obviously, you know, to automate and build yourself.
Yeah. So if I can clarify again, like the mindset, you took this example of arriving, I think you said in Uganda?
I'm sorry, we were in Ghana.
In Ghana. Okay.
Yeah.
Arriving into Ghana, you've got damage. And so the mindset is really self-reliance. Nobody else is going to fix this for us. This is on us. And secondly, what are the tools available for us? Like what's available here to solve the situation that at hand? And so we're bringing that into the business landscape. The citizen developer concept has that same mindset of, I'm not waiting for somebody else to come around and solve this for me, and I'm going to use the tools at my disposal.
100%. And thank you for actually distilling that. It's a really good point, right? It's about saying, yes, I can. Like, I'm going to figure this out, right? Not throwing up your hands and saying, this code looks like gobbledygook and I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Or saying, oh, well, that's actually developers' role. I can't step on their toes, right? But saying, like, this is my problem. I'm going to take ownership of it and I'm going to figure out a solution. And we're really blessed to live in a time when there are incredible, you know, assortment of tools out there, a lot of which are no code, to solve problems, right?
Yep, exactly. And with the assist of AI that can help us think through just about anything now with the right prompts and the right questioning, there's really fewer and fewer excuses around truly having like a stop point where you're like, oh, I can't proceed here, because you always have like a next question that you can ask, a next way that you can scratch the surface. And so really, like, I like that distinction, that mindset more than anything is the limiting factor here, not the tools at our disposal.
100%. And you know, you actually, I guess, are kind of leading into the next part of this conversation, which is that organizations have I think they oscillate back and forth between wanting to empower their people and wanting to, but want to be careful how much sort of shadow IT they adopt or absorb within their organization. And a lot of these tools are actually baked into the tools you're already using. So in the case of Google Apps Script, if your organization's on Google, the App Script's there, right? They usually know it. It's hidden behind there, but it's in there. And the same goes for a lot of Microsoft tools. I'm not as familiar with the Microsoft ecosystem, but I know there's a bunch of that kind of stuff that exists. So
Yeah, exactly. There are countless integrations built directly into Teams and SharePoint and the rest of that. So we talked earlier in the week, we were talking about Google Apps Script, and you used an interesting analogy of talking about Google Apps Script almost as a connective tissue that ties all of the rest of the Google business applications together. So I'm imagining that within our body, meaning that, like, connective tissue helps one part communicate to another and really gives you, without connective tissue, you don't really have a body, you just have disparate parts. So that's what I kind of think about. But let's talk about, like, dig into the why and the what of that. Like, why is that so powerful to have like a fully connected body of applications here? And then what exactly does that mean? How exactly does that work?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think connective tissue is a powerful way to think about it, right? Whether you want to borrow the analogy of like the nerves or the blood vessels or whatever, right? The idea that, and to clarify, I sort of threw these terms out before. Google Apps Script is what's called a low code platform, and the difference between a low code and like a typical dev platform is, dev platform you have to sort of stand it up. There's a lot of technical kind of know-how that's required for that. With Google Apps Script, you can literally, if you're in Google Sheets, you can just go to like the extensions tab, and the app script's right there, and it's already kind of built into to the back end of that sheet. And the same exists for it's the same case for Gmail and for Forms and for Slides and for a bunch of the other tools. I know there's actually a standalone app sheet platform as well. So if you don't want to have to run app sheets as part of like an existing document, you can kind of run it as its own application as well. And so, you know, to your point around, like, without connective tissue, you just have these individual organs, right? We've all been in that place where you're referencing an email, you're filling in a spreadsheet, or you're adding to a slide, or you're taking a spreadsheet and you're pulling that data into into an email template. And although, you know, a lot of our work is does require that kind of just one-off type tasks, whenever you see a task that's inherently redundant, that's an opportunity to use these tools, right? And so the example I love to give is the one I built at Google, which was a calendar, a conference room scheduler. And so, long story short, you know, we're in this big building, 8 floors. There's like 12 different of these restricted conference rooms, because they're like, you know, 30, 40 person conference rooms, and they just don't want anyone being able to book them because they end up just with waste. Well, there was a distribution list of all the admins that had access to book these rooms. And so a common sort of task for the day was just like, you get these emails and you go in and try and book these rooms. And it was just a lot of busy work, right? And there'd be a lot of back and forth and whatnot, right? Because people are trying to schedule things out. And so what I did was I created a Google form, and there were very specific instructions. You went to this web page built in Google Sites, big fan of that as well. You look at the conference rooms you need, find an available time, you put all that information into Google form, you click submit, and my script just checked those calendars, made sure they were available, and booked that time for you and sent you a confirmation email. And I, you know, once I built it for one building, I built it out for the rest of the entire campus. And, you know, it's hard to estimate exactly how much time we saved, but it was definitely in the realm of hundreds of hours over the course of a year. And more than anything, I think it really empowered people to use this technology. You know, admins typically aren't super technical, right? To use this technology to solve our own problems. And so we built a bunch of other kind of fun, more kind of admin specific type tools or using AppScript. But yeah, it just, you know, it made our jobs that little bit easier.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for the concrete example there, right? So it gave both visibility as well as like a workflow automation. So we're having software do that versus the time somebody was taking to poke around, see which one is available, maybe distract and interrupt somebody else to find out the information that they needed, and so on, right?
Exactly.
And so that's a little bit about this topic, about Google AppScript, what it does, why that's powerful to be able to tie applications together. We talked about the citizen developer and then connecting this to that type of person as a tool that can help them, like empower them to solve problems like this, and look for these and look for those opportunities. So another thing we were getting into was more of like a framework of how you think through problem solving, and something that we could kind of give to this citizen developer mindset. And we talked about like a first layer of it is simply to break it down into, is this solvable by code or not? Right. So then there's going to be certain questions we're going to ask if we can move right into solving this by code. And if not, we're going to have to look to process. So let's first kind of think through when the answer is yes, right? So if we have a decision tree here, yes, we can solve this with code. Then what set of like questions or do you go through in your mind after that? Like, what framework do you use once you've determined yes, code?
Yeah, absolutely. Is I took my first coding class in high school, and it was a really important shift for me mentally, because you can't get through a coding course without starting to think about breaking down every little sort of project into smaller projects until you have like a very kind of finite like task or sort of decision, right? And I'm an engineer kind of by trade, I guess, and so I think about it from the standpoint of like computers are literally just comprised of billions of transistors switching on and off. Like even like the computer, that's like almost incomprehensible complex machine, is actually just broken down into like individual transistors switching on and off. And so that's kind of how I think about problem solving, is like, let's just break the problem down again and again and again until you get to something that's so simple it's effectively like a yes or no kind of thing, right? And that's kind of at the heart of it, right? Like not every problem can be solved that way, but a lot of problems can be. And it's like the old Hindu kind of adage of, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And if you're looking at a problem where you don't maybe understand it well enough to be able to have that conversation, you find the people who do, right? Or you try and learn what you can, or you pull up ChatGPT and ask it to help you understand, you know what I mean? And you keep asking and drilling and drilling and drilling until you get to kind of those simple states. And this is how coding works, right? Then you compile those individual sort of components together, and you test and you test and you test and you compile and you test and you compile and you test, and you should build back up. And what you end with is something that's obviously repeatable, and to a certain degree automated, but you also understand it at like a very, very fundamental level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever need to tear it apart and to change something, some sort of underlying assumption that was wrong, you can do that. And you know, the joke in the dev world is, why solve a problem in 5 minutes when you can spend 5 hours automating it? And it's obviously, it's like a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke about the fact that devs just love to automate, but it's true too, right? Because yeah, you spend 5 hours automating something, but then you saved yourself 5 minutes today and 5 minutes tomorrow, and
5 minutes over and over and over again. It's like compounding interest.
Exactly.
In terms of the savings and productivity. Yeah, exactly. Man, my mind's still a little bit on the task of eating an elephant. That one's rough. I think just for the elephant's sake, for my sake, like, yeah, I'll stick to the tech task for now. All right, so that goes down that fork. So if we can code our way to a solution and break it down into all the way to the point of binary yes, no, then we're in good shape. So we're basically pulling apart chunks and then chunks and then chunks until we get down to, you know, these sort of molecular level that we can understand. And the benefit of that, of course, also being, hey, we know how this thing is put together now. If we need to go in and sort through a piece of it, there's an organized structure here, right? So it's kind of driven by order and sequence. Now, on the other hand, when it's not code, that means that we're going to be in this realm of process, habits, procedures, kind of organizing human activity in some way. And you brought in a concept that you had from the Navy that you still use when you're assessing process. You called it the 7 whys. So you mentioned that. You also mentioned the idea of starting with an assumption of best intent. So we've got a combination of kind of like a mindset and understanding the human operating system underneath this, and then this idea of the 7 whys. So let's dig into that. Tell us a little bit more about this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as you sort of alluded to, right, like people aren't transistors. So like the coding approach works with a lot of problems, but definitely not all of them. And anytime you're dealing with people, obviously there's a lot more complexity. And the beauty of the why problem, or the why approach, the 7 whys, is that it can take you in a number of places. If you do this a few times, you'll find that it will take you really deep into process, or it will take you out and up into like this broader sort of question around like questioning the question. So here's an example, right? If you're working on like a factory floor and you kept having some part fail that shouldn't be failing,
yeah,
and you drove down through the 7 whys, you would you'd ask, like, why is this part failing? Well, this part's failing because of like high heat. Why is this part failing because of high heat? Well, it's the friction's happening because of this series of things. Okay, why? Right? Well, because of this thing over here. Why? Well, because of this thing over there. Why? Well, actually, there's this grease that's supposed to be here and it's not here. Well, why? Oh, well, we always run out of it, and like we can't find it, and I didn't really know we were supposed to, use it. Why? And the answer is almost always training. That's what you find. And the reason the answer is almost always training in the Navy specifically is because this old adage, the Navy's designed by geniuses to be run by, I'm not going to use the word that we typically use, but regular people. I'll just say that. The common sort of person. And so Navy systems, because they've had just decades and decades to mature, are just remarkably robust. And you typically get to one of a few things. It's typically around training. It's around like some sort of maintenance requirement that's not being had. It's around supply restrictions, issues with supply, right? And so as a leader, it's a really, really powerful framework, right? But then the other way that you, as you approach the 7 whys is, and you'll find with people, when you're talking about like fundamentally people kind of type questions, you'll often, as you go down that rabbit hole of the why, you can get people to shift their thinking. And I encourage you to like use this with your people, right? With a manager who's struggling with a employee, or with an employee who's struggling with some task or whatever, right? And as you dive in, you can get them, as you ask why enough times, you'll get them to question the fundamental question itself. And when you start to question the questions, it gets like metaphysical, right? But
Yeah.
you start to kind of shift your thinking and ask, like, well, why am I viewing this problem the way I am? Why is this employee so difficult? Is a loaded question, needless to say, right? But
Yeah.
we've all been in this position where we're like, why is this person so difficult? Well, typically there's a little more to it than that, right? And this sort of bleeds into this question around assuming best intent, right? In the Navy, you get people from all walks of life. And as a junior officer, you got a division of 20 young 18, 19, 20-year-olds from all walks of life. And you always end up with like, it's the 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of your folks are doing 80% of the work. And then you've got this like 10% that's like your problem child, right? And I always like to assume, I always used to remind myself that young sailor, when they enlisted, didn't enlist in the Navy with the intention of being a dirtbag. That's like Navy slang for the problem child, right?
Right.
They enlisted with a sense of pride, right? And something along the way went sour. It could have been they had a really bad manager. It could have been that they're dealing with some stuff themselves, right? But digging into, I think, any manager of people owes it to their people to dig into that and really understand like what's going on, right? We talk a lot in this world in today about quiet quitting, right? Millennials, Gen Y, I guess, right? Are often looking for a lot more in work than work can give them, is from a sense of purpose and meaning, right? And the response is to kind of, it's like laying down, right? There's a common, it was sort of, it's been this sort of movement in China, is my understanding. I haven't been, but this sort of like quiet quitting or like lying down approach to like kind of just giving up. And I as a manager, as a people leader, like you owe it to your people, to yourself, to really talk to them and understand like what's going on, and assume best intent, and assume that they didn't aspire as an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old to be quiet quitting, right? They aspired to have a job and a profession that they were proud of, that they could they gave them purpose, right? And so I just, as a leader, as a manager, approach the world that way, and everyone's not going to meet you halfway, but you're going to find that you get a lot further, for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. So the 7 whys are not 7 different sort of why questions. They're just layers. They're descending down, just following the thread until you get to something that often has to do with training, or how a framework that was set up for somebody in the first place. And then with the idea of assuming best intent, I think of like Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. And the 4 distinctions he put together there are highly relevant to this idea. The first is like observations versus evaluations. So as you're mentioning, like, why is this person difficult, would be the evaluation. Observation would be like, oh, they're consistently, like not clocking in or not logging their hours or whatever it is, right? Yeah. So first getting specific about what exactly is the behavior, just like a video camera would record without any additional layers of evaluation on top of it. The next is feelings versus thoughts. And so trying to understand, like, what are the actual universal human feelings that are driving this person versus just all of it. Like our thoughts can be super varied. how we frame things, all of that. But when you get down to the feelings, people have the same core human feelings. We feel, happy, sad, mad, glad, etc., scared, and so on.
Yeah.
And then those are all driven by universal human needs. And the distinction there is also quite powerful between needs and strategies. So the actual need under the surface, and then the strategy, which are all the different ways people might try to get those needs met. And some might be effective, some not, some might be self-destructive, some might be other destructive, and so on. But that core level of assuming good intent is similar to like an empathetic framework of, there's a human here that has the same core, like at the foundation, the same like core operating system here that we all do. Now, how they're manifesting on these like surface levels and how I'm interpreting them on the surface is what we can pick apart. The final distinction was just about demands versus requests, right? So demands are the concept of like, hey, I have this need and you must satisfy it, right? Versus a request was this cooperative framework of like, hey, I've got this need, you've got this need, would you be willing to, and exploring through that range there. So yeah, I have also found that to be exceptionally helpful in management and just general human dealings and cooperations and partnerships and like that. Excellent. So that brings us into these frameworks. We talked a little bit about the audience that this is really most honed in on. And sometimes, you are your entire team, or you've got a small team, or you might have an organization that's large enough that you have something called middle management, and you actually have, people managers and process managers. And these are like the type of people that are going to be able to have the most satisfaction and growth by taking on this mindset, citizen developer, and being able to really offer the most like value to their organization. Can you talk a little bit about like how you've been involved in like the actual process or bringing that topic? Or sometimes what I notice is like organizations, business leaders, they'll nod their head to all this and know like, yeah, we need to focus on our software. We need to focus on productivity. Like we know this is important, but the momentum of like current culture is often hard to change, to influence. Have you had some success or some strategies in how you basically like interject or shock or add a change of course or a change of direction where this mindset can kind of insert itself and start to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. I really find that the best way to impact change is from the bottom up. And part of a leader's sort of job is to, and this sounds a little bit kind of malicious, right? But almost to convince people that your idea is their idea, right? So let's assume that you've got this like waterfall software development approach. You want to move to like an agile one, right? You can go across your team and talk to them and find out like what are their biggest headaches about the entire process, right? And it's a little bit like the sales process, right? You like start with a problem. You kind of work through like the challenges and then potential solutions, and then maybe through that process you come to the realization that the solution you thought wasn't the ultimate solution, right? That you want to come across to implement, right? But you can't go through that process and not figure out like the ideal end state. And after having walked everyone through that process and identified all the issues and the potential solutions, if you present that solution, you're like, hey, you essentially just described this to me. Like, does this fit your mold, right? They're all gonna be like, yeah, that sounds amazing, right?
Yeah. So what you're telling me is
exactly right.
exactly.
And that to me is a lot more time consuming up front. But what it's going to do is it means you're not fighting the team to change, right? Because no one really likes change, especially change that's forced upon them from above. And you'll find yourself having to have the same conversations about this new process for months, and it's going to drive you insane unless you can convince all of them up front that it's essentially their idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that, hey, like, let's not reinvent the wheel. Like, this has been figured out. Like, it's called agile. Like,
Yeah.
there's this like almost evangelical movement about agile software development. Like, let's just give it a try, because I think it solves all the problems that we have. And everyone shows up to work on Monday freaking stoked that they're trying out this new process, because they feel invested, because they feel like it was their idea, because it kind of was, right?
Yeah. You're mining it from the collective knowledge. It's kind of like, well, like another, well, why spend 5 minutes giving an order when you could take 5 hours building a movement, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the way I approach it. You can kind of get a sense from me that I'm all about building sort of coalitions and collaboration and stuff, which probably isn't what a lot of people kind of think of when they think of like a military officer, a military leader, but it really is the way that to build sort of followership, right, and to lead. At least that's been my experience. So that's kind of the mindset I apply to anything, whether it's going to be like any sort of change management. Ideally, you can apply that. That's obviously harder and harder to do at large organizations. And I won't lie, like, I struggled in the Navy because of that bureaucratic sort of stiffness, right? And I struggled at Google as well, because I felt like I just wasn't having impact. So for me, like, I'm a happy camper in the startup world, where I feel like where we're agile, we can move quickly, and it takes all types of people, right? Some people love those larger organizations where there's stability and consistency, and for me, it's a little bit kind of almost like paralyzing, right?
Yeah.
But there's lessons learned from both sides, and the beauty is, like, a lot of organizations are realizing they can have it both ways. They can have very agile, small, autonomous groups that are being charged with delivering like a specific product or specific sort of end solution, and kind of like with the software approach, right, where you've got a bunch of sort of build processes, and you bring it all together and you test. They're building products, and they're building teams that way, right? And so yeah, there's for me, that's kind of what works. But your mileage is going to vary. Your mileage is going to vary depending on.
I was like, what'd you say about my mom?
Depending on your.
Yeah, mileage will vary, exactly. No, I think that's such a good distinction. I get it often as like, questions instead of advice, right? Or enrollment instead of orders. So we've got something. We may even have an understanding, but we can utilize our team as a leader to really flesh out the full exploration. Like you said, get everybody involved. And now they're shareholders in this movement, in this idea. So that's from like the leader's point of view. You may be watching this and you're in that middle management point. And so similarly, it's bringing that, like, I think that's something that people often could re-examine as well, is that leaders really appreciate people that can bring questions and re-examination of concepts to the table. We as leaders are not particularly looking for followers. We're looking for collaborators. We're looking for people that can share in the ownership, because there's a lot that's on our shoulders. And anybody who's willing to pick up that slack is going to open up doors for themselves. And one of the best ways to do that are these questions that have to do with exploring unexamined concepts or re-examining concepts that haven't been visited for a while.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about underused features, and we really just kind of put Google Apps Script into that category broadly, is that it's just not well known, it's not well utilized. It addresses this issue of, if you're in a Google environment and you have shadow IT, and let's just define shadow IT again, is that's all the extra tools and logins and integrations and stuff that people are using because it seemed like the fastest path or their knowledge set led in that direction, but now it's creating, a disparate use of platforms across the organization, which is meaning that the productivity and efficiency of tying all that data together is there. It's also creating a lot of vulnerabilities and holes and entry points that are off the radar. Is that your basic assessment of shadow IT, or anything you would add to that?
100%. Yeah. Another way to think about it from like a hierarchical standpoint is you got like core IT and the tools that they sort of have supported and pushed, right? Kind of typically starts with like a, Microsoft or Google Workspace, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that's like outside of their purview, right? If you ask core IT about using this tool, it's not probably shadow IT.
Mm-hmm.
If when the little voice on your shoulder said, "Hey, we should really ask core IT about this," and you said, "Hell no," right? That'd be shadow IT. And some organizations are pushing some of these IT decisions down to like business units and having almost like mini core IT groups within business units to try and encourage adoption of more tools at a lower level where there's still transparency. Depending
Mm-hmm.
on your organization, it's going to be kind of different and unique. But yeah, all the stuff outside of the purview, and that could be like systems integrations that could actually create a real vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It could be also just like a Canva instance
Mm-hmm.
that has a bunch of like intellectual property of the
Yep.
business on it, right?
Yep.
That's not properly secured and kind of inventoried and whatnot.
I suspect it exists, but I'm picturing a kind of a shadow IT audit process that would go through a line of questions through all these categories, so that an organization could, and the individuals there could ID anything that would fall into that category, and then sort of map, okay, what would be the core tech parallel to that, the solution that would fit within their ecosystem, and then what's the the roadmap to transition from one to the other, and what are the priorities around it, right? And then it would be like, going forward, similarly, there's going to need to be some new process training, and the rest of that, as we often get down to with these subsequent whys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way it probably happens in practicality is you've got all your systems of record that are high valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're gonna look, you can essentially do a scan and see like everything that's connecting to them, and you're gonna just drop the connection of everything you're not supposed to. So if you got some integration into Salesforce because you had an admin privilege that you're probably not supposed to have, right? At some point, like a Salesforce admin is going to look and scan all the integrations and just drop everything that's not relevant, and then probably, and the same goes for like internal systems or anything else, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll probably send an email with that saying like, "Hey, we cleaned house, right? If this is affected in your business processes, come let us know." And then that's when the inquiry, the inquisition begins, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, tell me more. What was this thing that you had connected, right?
Yeah.
But it's the only way forward, right? You've got, anyone who's been following the news knows about all the ransomware attacks and all the other massive cybersecurity breaches. Organizations cannot continue to let the sort of gaps in security exist as they have.
Yeah. So organization leaders, like, that's your cue for reflection here, to say, based on the size of your organization, do you have any resources dedicated to even thinking about this or looking for this stuff? If not, is there somebody on your team that should be tasked with this, right? Because, like, we consider this critical core. If it has to do with security, if it has to do with data loss, like, these are the holes that they may not hurt you today, but then when they hurt, they hurt more than anything else, right? And so these are critical core considerations that can go under the radar. And the choices are: one, we've got this covered, we've got process in place to find this; two, we don't, but we have resources we can deploy; or three, we don't, and we need to outsource and make sure that the people that know how to do this, these gaps are covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so then let's talk a little bit about where AI fits in with Google Apps script. So where places where we're thinking that AI can further empower our citizen developers to utilize these tools quickly, effectively, like starting now.
Well, so the beauty is that Google Apps Script or ChatGPT is trained on Google Apps Script, so you can just ask it to put together a script. And the key with ChatGPT for any of you listeners who maybe haven't played with it or did, and you're like, oh, this thing doesn't work, or doesn't work as well as I expected. Imagine ChatGPT is a very, very bright but brand new intern
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't know anything about your business, about what you're thinking about it, really anything specific to you.
Yeah, yeah.
But it studied it studied in this case Google Apps Script pretty thoroughly, right? And so I literally will do like a word vomit, right, of like my problem, and I'll even include seemingly irrelevant or unimportant information. I just try and give it as much information as comes to mind.
Just here's my inner world. Put it out on the
Exactly right.
prompt. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had I had Cheerios for breakfast. No,
Yeah.
no, but seriously, right? Just like completely unload of like, hey, I work in this building. This is the name, and I work on a campus of this many buildings, and they use this kind of nomenclature, right? And I
Mhm.
work in a building with this many floors and these conference rooms on these levels, and on average they see these many people. And this is what I'm trying to do. And right now we have this thing, but it doesn't really work that well because of X, Y, and Z. Like, just go all in, right?
Mhm.
And it's gonna spit out a pretty incredible solution. I have
And
yet to be disappointed when you really prompt it properly.
and modes wise, are we talking 3.5? Are we talking 4 with plugins? Like what level, what mode do we want to be using for the best outcome here?
I use 4 just kind of by default. I use plugins occasionally, but I don't use them as much as I think a lot of people do. A lot of what I'm doing is this kind of like high level kind of framing out of like a problem set.
Mhm.
The beauty of ChatGPT is, of Google Apps Script is that um, the low code part of Google Apps Script is that it's actually created a bunch of different class names
Mhm.
that tie back into different parts of the application. So, for instance, if you're spinning up Google Apps Script within Google Forms, it sort of knows, hey, like what Google Forms is and how there's like these different field types and like what the different field types are. And it's done a lot of the early kind of scaffolding, if you will, to
Mhm.
help you kind of pull that information together. And so when you ask ChatGPT to build you a script, it knows all of that. So it can essentially kind of build out that scaffolding like with you and give you this really, which is probably going to be like a 90% solution. And then from there, you keep asking it questions, right? Of like,
Yep.
okay, what's the next step? Like,
Yep. Yep.
like play the 7 whys with ChatGPT.
Yeah,
Of like,
exactly.
you're having me do this thing, why?
Right.
Right? And just keep going. And I was working on some coding projects using ChatGPT, and it gave me this script. I went and pasted it in. I got this error. And so I was like, hey, I'm getting this error when I add the script and I don't understand. I think I'm missing something. And it's like, oh, you are misunderstanding like what's going on here. This is what's going on here. Like,
Mhm.
you're trying to load this script, but first you have to actually enter like the Python scripting engine first. So like, here are the commands enter the Python scripting engine. I mean, it understood the context of what was going on at a level that is parallel with like a tutor standing over your shoulder. I mean, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally cool. Love that.
So,
So
um,
let's kind of bring it all big picture together here. Here's what we covered. If you are using Google business applications, and if you have or would like to further nurture a citizen developer attitude, which is the idea of you're not going to wait around for the solution to emerge from somewhere else or like that, like you want to empower yourself to be able to come up with solutions and use the tools at your disposal, you can utilize Google Apps Scripts to tie together functions between any of the other Google applications that you're using. And you can start with ChatGPT for ideally with a prompt to it to tell it literally everything that you're trying to do and what you want to accomplish. You can generate a Google Apps Script prompt, which is already trained on. It can give you a starting point, and then you can continue to mine and torment that tutor endlessly. It will not fatigue. It will not get frustrated with you. It will just continue to inform you, educate you, and refine your process until you get to the outcomes that you want.
Exactly. Yep. And if you really get stuck, there's Fiverr, right?
Exactly right.
There's like this whole gig economy, right? Like you could probably find somebody if you really get stuck and you're like, I'm like 90% of the way there, but I can't finish it. Go on Fiverr and explain the problem, explain the errors you're getting out of it. Say, obviously, hopefully you've already used ChatGPT. For some reason, it can't help, or it's not getting there. And yeah, you could find one of these like gig economy devs, because ChatGPT is pretty straightforward. It's just JavaScript who can help you. So like even then, there's always like another way, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not to set self-reliance doesn't mean that you don't include other people. Other people are part of the resources, at your disposal that you can tap here.
A lot of self-reliance is actually being able to say, I need help.
I need help. Yeah,
It
exactly.
sounds counterintuitive, but it's
Right.
not at
Right.
all.
Yeah. It's being able to say whatever is the next thing needed to move in the direction you want to keep moving. So let's tease out a little bit about what we're going to do for our Productivity Hub members. And if you're watching this on YouTube or other platforms and you're like, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a Productivity Hub member? Check the link below down in the description. You can join the platform. Every episode, we always have a lot of great content publicly, and then we always keep a little something special, a little how-to tucked aside for our members. So check that out. And today, I think we're going to do a walkthrough of this actual process of prompting ChatGPT to do something for us, creating some Google Apps script. We're going to connect some applications together, and we're going to show you like a working example of that, something you could do in the next 5, 10, 15 minutes and start experimenting or build something actually really useful to you immediately. So before we sign off on the public portion of this episode, Terence, you want to give us some updates on what's going on in your world and anything else that you want our audience to know about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm running a company called Dream Factory Software, and we have a developer automation tool for building APIs. The category we created, we worked with G2 on, is called API generation. Mm-hmm. And simply put, right, the traditional way to build APIs is sort of this code first or design first kind of bespoke process where you're building from the bottom up. You're building from a set of like consumer kind of user requirements. That works really well, and it's necessary for public APIs. But if you're working with an established data layer or data structure, database, right, and you want to just get that data out in a really secure way using APIs, that's where the tool like Dream Factory API generation comes in place. And so we can map that data model forward into an API and instantly generate an API, run all the unit tests to make sure it's working correctly as expected. You go ahead and create a role against that and an API key, and you're off and running. It's core open source product, so it means that the core product is open source and free to use, and then there's a bunch of enterprise connectors and enterprise features that are paid, right? And where we see a lot of adoption is kind of two ends of the spectrum. Imagine you're a developer and you're building a sort of proof of concept, an MVP, and you're building on Airtable, but you're a little bit worried about like that future scalability of Airtable, and there's a lot of kind of nightmare stories of people trying to move off of Airtable down the road. Mm-hmm. If you can spin up a Postgres database, which is you can do for almost free on a cloud provider. Spin up Dream Factory, connect to that database, and serve data out via an API, and get a lot of that kind of functionality you would out of like an Airtable, using open source software that's going to be future proofed. Mm-hmm. And so you see a lot of use cases around that. And then the far end of the spectrum, we see use cases around specifically large organizations, banks, insurance companies, the government, who have a lot of systems, often legacy systems, kind of systems upon systems layered over decades. And they need to serve that data out and connect it via microservices, mm-hmm. via API. And so Dream Factory is a really eloquent, really secure, fast way of doing that. And we're connected from everything from a 1972 IBM mainframe at the state of Vermont to a modern, Snowflake data warehouse, right? So like the spectrum is kind of absurdly broad that we can work with, and so yeah, it's been a lot of fun having a lot of fun. It's I coming from this kind of like no code space into here has been really really rewarding. You realize that there's just so much kind of in common and in parallel between these worlds and what we're all trying to do. Everyone's trying to kind of solve the problems in front of them and move quick. And so yeah, so if you want to reach out, I'm not on a ton of social media except for LinkedIn, or just reach out to dreamfactory.com and love to get in touch. Answer any questions.
And developers will hear this and understand like the power and know what you're working on there. Business leaders, you want to do one of two things. Have your developers listen to this and say, okay, where could we make use of tools like this in our organization? And then maybe also understand just the core why. So for a business leader, when I think about this, and I try to break it down to the kind of the like lowest common denominator, I'm thinking this means that data is shared more fluidly across our applications. It means that we are reducing the amount of area where data is missed, duplicated, or incorrect. Any other like core why that you think of when we're just talking APIs and why a business leader would care about this?
Yeah, so the integrations we're typically working on are largely around automation or legacy systems. And so it's often the conversation of, you got this database over here, it was built for this use case, it's great at that thing, and now we need that data somewhere else, right? And building those kinds of custom integrations is incredibly expensive and often error prone, because you end up with like two people know how they work, right?
Yes.
And so Dream Factory is really, really powerful for that kind of work, where you're talking about just kind of getting data across an environment through firewalls into places maybe it wasn't initially intended, but now is needed, right? And that's sort of the future, right? Is like any organization to be successful, to be future proof, has to figure out how to get the data that already exists into the right hands, into the right systems, integrated, right? And
dude, this was the other one. I'm so glad I remembered this, because this is like really also what you were talking about. This allows people to do if you combine generative AI with specific permissions in this, it's kind of starting to be able to create what we all like most want from AI as business, which is our own internal Oracle. It can now has access to all of the data we need, so we can now ask it questions, and everybody on our team with the right permissions can ask questions and get the information that they need from an internal Oracle, instead of having to disturb somebody else's work, send an email. Like, think about how much we're going to be able to get the more that this core concept advances. An internal Oracle that knows everything that we need it to know about our business, and that we can tap for insights, for quick Q&A, for forecasting, for ideas for efficiency. I think that's the real big picture concept for people to get, like that you're actually providing a tool that's moving in that, helping to facilitate that outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of take a step back, right? We're getting to a place very quickly where ChatGPT is kind of this like public resource, right? You're going to start to get access to like an internal version of ChatGPT that sits within your environment. It's kind of protected, right? Yeah. And so with tools like Semantic Kernel, and there's a bunch of others, right, that are starting to pop up, you'll be able to ingest an API into that platform. So right now there's plugins which allows you to kind of ingest like public APIs. Imagine being able to ingest a public API connected to your backend database and being able to actually essentially have a conversation with that database, right? So instead of going through your business intelligence analyst to dig through the numbers, right? Just being able to like literally query the truth of source with a tool like ChatGPT at your disposal to just make sense of and dig through data.
That's awesome. And that's like really the direction that the Microsoft and Google ecosystems are working with all of their applications. Yep. But my thought is, you know what, that's not going to include like your homegrown ERP and like all of these other things that you've been using for 20 years that are not like nicely situated in these centralized applications and structures yet. And so there's going to be pieces that Microsoft and Google can't tap into, and this is potentially a part of those bridges.
Yeah, so what they want to own is ultimately like the integration layer. They want to own that like integration platform that sits within the environment and connects everything. And it's going to be ultimately it's going to be LLM or model agnostic, right? So you'll be able to kind of plug and play different models for different use cases, probably even at the same time, right? So yeah, it's a wide new world we're moved into for sure.
That's awesome. All right, well, gang, if you got some value from this episode with Terence, and I certainly hope you did, I certainly did, make sure to like, subscribe. Please leave a comment below. What was your biggest takeaway here, your biggest insight? And what would you like to hear from Terence next visit? So go ahead and take a moment to do that now. We'll see you on the next episode.